Hello and welcome to Together is Home. After spending over a week with our best friends in Greenville, South Carolina, it was time to move on to Shenandoah, Virginia. We had a great time visiting with our friends in Greenville, and we were so sad to leave, but we were also excited to see Shenandoah, Virginia and all that it had to offer. We'd never been to Virginia before, and we were greeted with beautiful mountains and fog on our drive. The fog around the mountains made it feel like we were driving through the clouds. It was nothing like we'd ever seen before. The fog didn't last for long though, and pretty soon the sun was out. And that sort of served as an omen for how the rest of our week would go. We battled the fog and the rain all week long, but there were also some very beautiful days as well. We stayed at the Shenandoah Harrisonburg KOA, about 30 minutes away from the national park and about 20 minutes or 15 minutes away from Harrisonburg.
We have arrived, and so far this KOA looks beautiful. This is our second KOA. We're really excited to be here. The one in Florida we really enjoyed. So we're gonna go check in.
The campground was really pretty. It was very secluded. We had to drive about 15 minutes on a very hilly, curvy, farm type road through the valley of Shenandoah, and it was a really pretty drive. The campground we stayed at really made it feel like we were camping. There were plenty of bugs. We saw some deer at our campground. It was very quiet and peaceful, and also there were some campground chickens that we saw roaming around quite a few times. There were plenty of amenities which we've come to expect from KOAs. There was a pavilion with games and picnic tables. There was a pool. There was a pet area with a pet wash. There was a fishing pond. There was a few hiking trails, and of course there was a nice general store located on the property. That made it very convenient because, like I said, we were at least 15 or 20 minutes away from pretty much anything. So if we forgot something or if we needed to pick something up, which we needed to do at least a couple of times, it was much nicer to go 5 minutes away from our site versus 20 minutes to the nearest store. The general store also sold personal-sized pizzas, which made it really nice because there was a night where we forgot about dinner, and so it wasn't spectacular pizza, but it was convenient pizza and it wasn't bad.
So today was a stay-in day since it rained pretty much all day long, and for dinner we decided to order the campground's pizza. They have a full menu of different pizzas you can order here. This KOA, not all KOAs have this, but this one does. So we wanted to try it out. I ordered the cheesy squirrel. These are all the prices with it. And Dylan ordered the baby bear. So we're gonna see how it turns out.
The only negative thing we have to say about our campsite was the water pressure. The whole time we were there, we struggled to get a decent amount of water pressure. In fact, there were a couple of times where the water shut off completely. At least one of those times was due to a water line bursting. But the whole week we really battled with the water pressure. There were times where it barely would trickle out of the faucet. But other than that, we really enjoyed our time at the Harrisonburg Shenandoah KOA. The first thing we did in Shenandoah was visit Luray Caverns. On the way there though, we stopped for lunch in a nice little village called New Market. The cafe was located in what I'll call the town building. By that I mean, in this old converted house, there was the cafe, there was a museum, there was a gift shop, and there was also a chamber of commerce. The food was excellent and the atmosphere might have been even better. It really felt like we had almost stepped back in time for a moment into this quaint little village, and we really enjoyed our time there in New Market. But after lunch, we headed to Luray Caverns. Really enjoyed our time at Luray Caverns. There is also another cavern, I believe the Shenandoah Caverns. Unfortunately, we didn't get to stop there. We chose Luray Caverns just because it felt like we got a better bang for our buck. Not only were the caverns there, which were beautiful, but there were also a few other exhibits. There was a Toys of Yesterday exhibit where you got to see kind of the progression of toys, at least in America. There was also something called the Car and Carriages Caravan, which was basically an old car collection that you could walk through, and that was really interesting, especially if you're into old cars. There was also a rope adventure park and a garden maze that you could walk through. We spent at least 3 hours there, but we could have certainly spent more time at Luray Caverns. Of course, most of our time was spent inside the cavern itself. I believe it was about 1.5 miles walk through in the cavern. It was a self-guided tour. They handed you a pamphlet on your way in that had a little bit of information about certain areas in the cavern. It was set up very nicely, very well lit, and overall it was a great experience. The next day we explored downtown Harrisonburg and stopped in for lunch at a place called Jack Brown's. Jack Brown's had incredible burgers, and because of coronavirus they were only offering patio seating, which was nice because it was a beautiful day with a cool breeze. Downtown Harrisonburg had a lot to offer. We didn't get to spend as much time there as we would have liked, but we did spend a few minutes walking past the shops and taking in the sights of that very historic town. And then the next day, we finally made it over to Shenandoah National Park. Unfortunately, it was a very, very foggy day. As we were driving to the national park and driving up the mountain, it became apparent to us that we might not be able to see much once we finally got up to the national park, but we took our chances. Unfortunately, it didn't really pan out. But luckily for us, we purchased the week pass for $30, which meant we could come back anytime for the next 7 days. After we purchased the week pass, we remembered about the annual pass that was $80, and we wish we would have got the annual pass while we were already at a national park, but we'll definitely keep that in mind. At the next national park, we'll be sure to get the annual pass. Shenandoah National Park is basically a scenic drive. There are, of course, a lot of overlooks and a couple of small shops you can stop in at. There are also some campgrounds located within the national park, but for the most part, the main attraction is the drive.
Because of all the rain and the fog, the woods kind of look a little bit creepy. Very pretty at the same time though. But there's this area in the middle of the woods that definitely fits the creepy vibe going on right now. I'm sure it's used for something, but just thought it looked a little bit eerie in the fog and the mist of these woods. But still, of course, very beautiful.
A week prior to coming to Shenandoah, Virginia, we were in Asheville, North Carolina just for a weekend, and we were able to spend some time on the Blue Ridge Parkway. And I would say that Blue Ridge Parkway and Skyline Drive are very, very similar. The only difference being that Shenandoah National Park was much foggier, at least while we were there. We knew that we certainly were going to come back. We were a little disappointed that the weather didn't cooperate, but of course nobody is to blame for that but ourselves. We should have looked at the weather before we went. One thing we saw while we were driving through the national park was a stop off for Dark Hollow Falls Trail. We were tempted to go on that hike right then and there, but we knew that the weather was not great. We knew it was kind of wet out, it was getting kind of dark, and ultimately we knew that we weren't really equipped for that kind of hike. I was wearing some old Nike running shoes that had no traction, and Casey was wearing some Toms, and we knew that the terrain was kind of rocky and wet and probably slippery, so we decided against it then. But we did decide to go and purchase some hiking shoes. So we left the national park and we went back to Luray, and we stopped in at this local outfitter to pick up some hiking shoes.
So we are quickly realizing that the kind of shoes we have are not very good for hiking. So we came to Luray downtown to hopefully buy some hiking shoes.
Once we got back to camp with our new hiking shoes, we knew that we had to break them in, so we took advantage of one of the trails at our campground. We didn't know when we started off on the trail, but the trail that we chose was about 3.5 miles long. I think we probably walked about half a mile and then decided to turn around, so all in all we walked about a mile of the 3-mile hike. We may have went further, but it was around 8:30 or so, getting dark, and as we had been reminded of a number of times, we were in bear country, and that made me a little bit nervous, so we decided to come back before nightfall. After waiting a couple of days for the weather to clear, we headed back to Shenandoah National Park. This time the views were much more breathtaking, the scenery was much more impressive, and also the park was much more crowded. But before actually making it to the national park, we stopped for lunch at a place called Mr. J's Bagels and Deli. We actually stopped there about 4 times during our time in Shenandoah, but we just happened to stop there on the way to the national park this time. The national park had a completely different feel this time without the fog. Before, it was almost like we were driving through the scene of a horror movie with that creepy Blair Witch kind of vibe. But this time the sky was clear, you could see for miles from the overlooks, and some wildlife even came out to greet us. Now equipped with our new hiking shoes, we were able to hike Dark Hollow Falls Trail. We were excited to do it until we pulled in, and then we were kind of nervous. As we got out of the truck and saw the people returning from the hike, we noticed that they were all out of breath and really tired. And we had never really done much hiking before, so we were kind of afraid that we were in over our heads. And really, we probably were, but I'm glad that we decided to do it anyway. On the way to the national park, we stopped at Dick's Sporting Goods to get some bear spray because again, we're in bear country and I'm a little bit paranoid about that sort of thing. But unfortunately, they were out. So other than my paranoia of bears and even snakes, we really enjoyed our time on the trail. The waterfall at the end of the trail certainly made the hike down the mountain well worth it. I'm not quite sure if the hike back up the mountain was worth it, but once we were down, we had to come back up. It took probably twice as long to come up as it did down, but it was an experience to say the least. hike, we were pretty much out of energy to do anything else. We drove around the national park a little bit more. We drove south probably 20 or 30 miles, just stopping in at a few of the overlooks, and then we called it a day and headed back to camp. Even though our time in Shenandoah was interrupted by some unfavorable weather, we really enjoyed our time in nature. It was nice to take a break and kind of experience a slower pace of life and really feel like we were camping. We decided that Virginia was too pretty to leave, so we're off to Williamsburg for the next 10 days. We're excited to see what Williamsburg and the historic Triangle of Virginia have to offer, and are even more excited to share it with you. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment. Share this video with anyone who might enjoy RV related content or who may be interested in Shenandoah, Virginia. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the road.